Thank you, Adrian. Can you all hear me well? Welcome, Professor Sook-Young Kim. It's a pleasure to have you with us this fine morning here in Kuala Lumpur. I understand that you have joined us all the way from your base in Los Angeles, and it's about 8 at night at your side now?
That's right. It is.
Thank you, Professor. Right. Let me just do a quick introduction for the audience. Again, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we welcome Professor Sook-Young Kim, who is a professor of theatre and performance studies at the UCLA School of Theatre. And Professor Kim is an expert in the K-pop industry, and of course, as you all know, she'll be speaking about the Korean wave and the rise of Korea's cultural economy and pop culture. Now, just as a quick introduction, before I hand it over to the professor, Professor Kim's research interests cover a wide range of academic disciplines, such as East Asian performance and visual culture, gender nationalism, Korean cultural studies, Russian literature, and Slavic folklore. Publications have appeared in English, German, Korean, Polish, and Russian, while her research have been acknowledged by the International Federation for Theatre Research's New Scholars Prize in 2004, the American Society for Theatre Research Fellowship in 2006, the Library of Congress Kluge Fellowship in 2006 and 7, and the Academy of Korean Studies Research Grant, that's in 2008, 2010, 2015 until 2020, amongst others. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I shall hand the session over to Professor Sook-Young Kim. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and selamat pagi. I know that it's daytime over there, but it's quite late at where I am. But I'm very happy to travel forward in time and be there with you on October 14th to speak at the Kuala Lumpur Creative Economy Forum 2021. So Korean wave, as we know, is not something that emerged out of nowhere, and it has a very extensive history. I would say about 30 years by now. So given the short amount of time that I have with you today, I'm going to really focus on some of the key questions to address the rise of Korean popular culture globally. And I must say that Korea is truly living the heyday of its dreams and is placed on the limelight for the global audience to see. So some of the questions that I would like to explore today include: who are the key players in transforming Korea into a global pop culture hub? And how do we create viral storytelling, which in my view is what is really at the heart of Korean pop culture's popularity. Whether we're talking about Korean dramas or K-pop music videos, there's always contagious viral stories that are being told. So I would like to tease out some of the ingredients as to what makes viral storytelling in Korean culture. And most importantly, how did Korean wave grow with the changing media ecosystem? And I think number 3 is probably at the heart of Korean pop culture's success that drive its high visibility and prominence today. So again, given the interest of time, I'm going to focus on BTS, arguably the most successful K-pop group to have existed. And I'm going to use another case study of Squid Game, which is really the rage of today's Netflix shows. As of October 13, which is still today in LA and yesterday for those folks listening in Malaysia, this show has become Netflix's most viewed show in just 1 month. So I'm going to explore these questions through the case of BTS and Squid Game. So moving on to some key players who drive Korean culture industry. As you can see from the size of the circles that I'm sharing here with you, Korean culture is truly a hyper-commercialized world that is driven by private companies, which I named private sector, and they respond to the needs and demands of domestic and later global consumers. So those two players are key protagonists of sketching out Korean cultural industry today. And what I termed as public sector is mostly government branch, government subsidiary, nonprofit organizations, such as Korea Tourism Organization and Korea Creative Content Agency. And this public sector actually entered the scene rather late. So it was around 2009, 2010, and 11 that Korean government has really come to understanding the enormous potential of Korean pop culture as a way, an instrument to enhance Korea's soft power and transform its national image for global audience. So unlike the public perception out there that Korean government really fostered Korean cultural industry, actually it's Korean government who came late to the scene to, in a way, benefit and take advantage of pop culture's enormous popularity that has been really developing due to this private sector and consumers' constant demand and supply interaction. And as an academic, I think it's a rather pity that academia is not playing such a big role in this ecosystem. But I think academia has a lot to contribute in terms of kind of meeting the demands of global audience. And I can definitely address that during Q&A. One thing I'd like to point out here is that some of the most successful private corporations, such as HYBE Entertainment, which manages BTS, Showbox, which is arguably the most successful Korean drama production studio, and SM Entertainment, which is probably the forerunner of K-pop industry, are really outside of the interaction with public sector. I mean, they are very independent financially because those are corporations that are really driven by these hyper-commercialized needs of consumers. So the kind of private sector and public sector's kind of common denominator usually benefit kind of small-scale entertainment companies, or those who are not really part of big corporate structures, such as individuals who aspire to be content creators and so on and so forth. So this is not to say that Korean government did not play a significant role in fostering the current K-culture's ecosystem. In my perspective, the major contribution that Korean government presented to this ecosystem is that it enabled fairly early on digitization of the entire nation, and it brought in this free market competition that resulted in low cost and high quality broadband services. So you can imagine that with the availability of very high quality internet service, suddenly there was an increasing demand for cultural content to be consumed. When people have access to high-speed internet with their cell phones, iPads, and personal computers, you need content to be consumed with those infrastructures. So in a way, Korean government, with its digital transformation campaign, which started in late 1990s, really paved the infrastructural ground for Korean pop culture industry to thrive later on. And it was around 2009 that Korean Ministry of Culture, Sport, and Tourism created this subsidiary called Korea Creative Content Agency to help out small-scale players in private sector to be connected to global audience and fund their projects so that their stories, fashion designs, and other creative content such as webtoon, games could reach global market. So I'd like to briefly introduce what this organization is about and what they do. If you look at their website, their vision is to develop Korea into one of the world's top 5 content powerhouses. And if we claim that today, I mean, it would not be an overstatement due to enormous success of K-pop industry and Korean drama entertainment industry. But back in 2009, it rather seemed like a big dream that might not come true. But I think the government really was persistent through its various projects that they fund, small scale entertainment players to enter the global market. And their mission statement is to contribute to creating jobs and improving quality of life through advancing the content industry. So to bring this closer to how things are done, if you were to contact Korea Creative Content Agency and ask for help, if you're a story developer, before we get there, actually, the Korea Creative Content Agency's outlook is truly global. So they have business centers in North America, Europe, and Asia. So you can see that those are very important markets for Korean content agency. And they also have marketers researching the cultural industry markets in Brazil and in UAE. So you can see that those are very important target markets and regions for Korean culture industry. So to bring you closer to how things are done, if you were to approach Korea Creative Content Agency, if you are, say, a writer who's developing a story, they would assist you through various mechanisms. So guiding you through from the very early stages of story planning to commercialization of stories. KOCA, which is an abbreviation for Korea Creative Content Agency, would host story contests to select highly creative storytellers, and also host workshops to discover creation materials. And they would help you be connected to potential production companies and to overseas markets. And as you've seen, these overseas markets are there precisely to facilitate the process of serving as an interface between individual content creators and potential overseas production companies and markets. So as you can see, storytelling is really the backbone of sustaining the success of Korean culture industry. And I would like to shift gears a little bit now to see how we can actually suss out those examples in successful cases through BTS and Squid Game, which is the latest kind of viral show on Netflix. And in order to really get to the bottom of how do we create viral storytelling, I would like to cite Robert Schiller, who is a professor of economics at Yale University. And he published a book titled Narrative Economics in 2019. And in this book, he tells the importance of storytelling as having a decisive power on people's economic decisions. And he shares concrete advice as to how to create very viral stories. He says, first, give people a story they can retell. Second, include a visual image. And third, value what your audience values. So I want to go a little deeper by sharing some examples from BTS's example. So how do they give people a story they can retell? And this is very typical creative process for many other K-pop idol groups. And they usually start with a key concept So if they're releasing a new album, there's a key concept about this is about struggling youth, or this is about friendship. And usually those key concepts are not just left at abstract level, but they are immediately visualized. And once that system has been set, then individual creative team would start on with choreography, fashion choices, and songwriting. So let's take BTS's 2020 mega hit song Dynamite as an example, which was their first English language song that landed on #1 spot in Billboard Hot 100 chart. As you can see here from this choreographic sequence, you can immediately tell that the main key concept of this song is the disco era, which provokes some nostalgia for older audience, and it provokes something new and old, something retro, as well as something new for generation millennials and generation Z. So if you look at the choreographic sequence, it kind of brings us back to the era of Motown music scene in Detroit. And of course, we cannot forget the king of disco, John Travolta, and his memorable performance in Saturday Night Fever. So this key concept is crucial for storytelling, and it involves visual image. And because the visual image is so emblematic and iconic, people can usually retell it easily to others. Another key concepts that define BTS's storytelling can be summed up as entertainers who create socially responsible entertainment. What do I mean by that? This is also a very important factor for millennial and Generation Z consumers. Just like many consumers who consume food products care about how their food is made, whether it went through ethical process or not, whether it involved exploitation of workers or not. Consumers of pop culture today, especially Generation MZ, millennials and Generation Z, care so much about whether their entertainment that they're consuming has been produced in a responsible way or not. And I think BTS has been very successful in creating their public image as someone who creates socially responsible entertainment. And I think the best way to illustrate this is by looking into how BTS has made several appearances at UN General Assembly. The picture you see here is their second appearance at UN General Assembly just last month. And as a representative of millennial generation, they spoke about the COVID crisis and climate change. So the public image of BTS, the story that they want to tell about themselves is that we are the voices of the new generation, and we do care about the responsibility that we have to be aware of as a young generation living in today's world. Another key story that BTS tells quite often is can be understood as their strategy to reach out to younger audience as well as older audience. And the key story can be summed up as neutral, meaning something new and something retro is combined. So if you look at, again, the album design of the song Dynamite, it brings us back to that kind of nostalgic era of, when disco was at the height of its popularity. And here you also see the word retro prominently featured. So again, BTS has done quite well because they can tell a story that are also resonating deeply as key words in defining who Generation MZ is today. Now, in terms of BTS's content that circulates through global platforms, it is very significant to note that BTS's success has been truly defined by the rise of social media Of course, BTS is incredibly talented, hardworking group, and their fans are so passionate about supporting their idols. But I think also in large part, their success has much to do with their effective use of global media platforms such as YouTube and Twitter. What I would like to point out as a significant shift in recent years, mostly starting with 2020, was that BTS's massive content traffic that's often trending on YouTube and Twitter is now slowly migrating to Korean platforms. So if you look at on the right side, the Weverse is a social media platform that's managed by BTS's own company, HYBE Entertainment. And so much of the Twitter content is hopefully migrating to Weverse. And VLive is another video streaming platform, which is hoping to migrate so much of BTS content that's being streamed on YouTube. So to kind of put a diagnosis on this phenomenon, we can see that platforms on which BTS contents are shared, streamlined, are becoming localized and being owned by Korean companies. And behind this move is this Korean Google. I mean, we call the video streaming and digital platform company Naver as Korean Google. So the Korean company Naver is behind the merger of Weverse and VLive to create more powerful digital platform to kind of be competitive with US platforms such as YouTube and Twitter. And this is very significant in my view, because owning your own platform makes a huge difference in further kind of availing yourself to global audience, as well as understanding the data about who's consuming and circulating BTS related content. So continuing on with these case study of viral storytelling and media ecosystem, I would like to move on to the second example of Squid Game. So as I said, just within 1 month of its release on Netflix, it has now become most watched show on Netflix, with over 111 million households having viewed the content. So what makes it so viral? And what can we say about media ecosystem that allows Korean dramas to be visible? In terms of storytelling, I think what made it so viral for Squid Game is that it was able to just very effectively blend local components with global components. So on a thematic level, there is so much of Korean children's game, but then I don't want to spoil it too much for those who haven't seen it, but it speaks so much about the economic crisis during COVID-19, which global audience can easily relate to. In terms of language, it made dubbing services in 13 languages, so global audience can easily watch the show without the barrier of language. But at the same time, it was not shy about using a very specific Korean word, such as ganbu, to introduce new concept to global audience. So there's like balancing of what is local and global on linguistic level as well. And in terms of genre, I think Squid Game was really successful in a sense that it was truly genre-bending drama. So globally speaking, I mean, the show is somewhat familiar because it could be identified as thriller, mystery, death game, survival reality shows that global audience is familiar with, but it also blended in what is specifically kind of, emblematic signature of Korean dramas, the focus on family melodrama and some components of Asia extreme in its portrayal of violence and gore. Now, going back to Robert Schiller's suggestion about how to make stories viral, you should have very memorable visual images. So here, the color palette of the opposite color palette of red and green create this stark contrast between those who are in control and those who are being controlled. And that vertical scheme of those who are being in control, putting on a higher platform, is further extended when the prize of the game, the money, is introduced to the screen, hanging up there as the highest kind of component in value system in this world. So there's very effective, memorable visual storytelling going on. And I personally love the design of this show, which combines so many theatrical elements of circus and the use of spectacular sets that really remind us of the risk and speculation that goes into performing something akin to circus. So to wrap up my presentation, I think this marriage with Netflix on part of Korean drama could be a win-win situation for Netflix and Korean drama as well, because Netflix as a platform has to depend on expansion of subscribers. I mean, they don't generate profit based on advertisement. There's no advertisement on Netflix, but Netflix as a company can only grow if they expand subscribers in places like Asia and Africa. And Asian and African markets have responded well to Korean content previously. So that's why Netflix is investing heavily in Korean content. And there is cost effectiveness that appeals to Netflix, meaning that viral Korean dramas cost very little money to make when it's compared to Netflix's some of the successful series such as Bridgerton or The Crown, which is the most expensive Netflix show to have existed. At the same time, the flip side of that story is that for all its cost effectiveness, we have to think about whether Korean cultural industry workers are being paid fairly. And that is sort of the flip side of this cost effectiveness that attracts global media platforms such as Netflix to Korean culture industry. From the perspective of Korean drama industry, working with Netflix is liberating in a sense that it doesn't have to really be concerned about production budget because everything is prepaid. And the failure, the potential risk that comes from potential failure will be all absorbed by Netflix. So the content creators in Korea can truly focus on their, content creation without worrying about financial failures or not having enough freedom to express risky subjects, as we see in Squid Game. However, all the financial success that the drama Squid Game has generated for Netflix is not trickling down to Korean drama industry because as of now, the Korean drama industry is playing a role of subcontractor. So they're being paid a lump sum in advance, but they're not kind of reaping the benefits of the show going viral and becoming the most popular show. So this is a way to think about why BTS is hoping to create its competitive platform that can measure up to YouTube and Twitter. So this is my final slide. What can we learn from this whole story of Hallyu, the Korean wave? And I think there are some takeaways that are really important and perhaps could shed light on the context of Malaysian culture industry. I believe that adapting to evolving media environment is truly important, as Korean industry has done, kind of riding the tides of YouTube and Twitter early on for K-pop industry and forging close partnership with Netflix for global visibility. And the power of viral storytelling is important and partly stems from Korea's cultural hybridity. And I think this has a lot to do with the Malaysian context as being in between spaces, on the one hand being part of Asian country, but also having substantial Muslim population. And then I would say that the organic bottom-up growth of the cultural industry is much more effective in reaching out to global audience than having severe government intervention as a top-down model. Thank you for being here with me, and I would welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you, Professor, for such an insightful presentation. I'm sure that has opened up the eyes and minds of us here in Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia. Of course, we definitely have been hit by the Korean wave, I must say, in the past 10 years. And my comment to that, it has moved on from the Wonder Girls then until it is today, because I was exposed to K-pop way back then, because I have got teenage daughters. And I just want to take one or two questions from the audience, but I think I can roll it up into one question, and I'll top it off with one from myself. Okay, first of all, you mentioned about the influence. Of course, the K-pop explosion, the wave, is actually pushed by the convergence of a few elements within the ecosystem. But you mentioned that government came in a little bit later with the formation of the Korean Creative Content Agency, or KOCA. We'd just like to know what has KOCA done since it got involved, and what's the mix of the people who run KOCA as an agency?
Sure, that's a great question. There is a bit more convergence of academics and government administrator when it comes to KOCA. One of the biggest contributions that KOCA has made to this ecosystem is that they provide research for those who are hoping to knock on foreign markets. So, and those research materials happen to be very helpful for not only academics, but potential creative, content providers. So I think this is one area where academics play the most significant role by providing consultancy as well as serving as researchers and kind of creating white paper and generating data for both industry as well as academics who are serving as chroniclers of this historical moment for Korean culture industry. And of course, this is all kind of steered by the government administrators who distribute resources for those activities to take place.
Thank you, Professor. I think with the time that we have left, I'm able to just add one more question. I think we've seen K-pop reach a global audience. What would you say would be the one tipping point that caused it? And what's the difference that allowed the likes of BTS to come forward amongst the pool of talent that Korea has under the K-pop wave?
That's a really good point. I think people might have different answers, but for me, the kind of turning point for K-pop was when the bands were actually trying to adapt to the successful music business model in the United States. What I mean by that is for any musicians to have mainstream career in the US, they have to do live tours. So Korean idols used to have a very thriving kind of career and presence in online space, mostly through YouTube, social media. But once they start doing tours in major US cities, following the models of US music industry, there was more of a bottom-up buildup of fandom. And some of the early groups which were able to do live tours include Super Junior, Big Bang, and I think those move towards kind of more adapting to US model really opened up and paved ground for groups like BTS to emerge and have the stadium concerts globally.
Thank you, Professor. I guess it's time now, right? For the host, again, I would like to thank Professor Sup Yung Kim for being with us on this fine morning and having come all the way from your base in Los Angeles. We really, truly appreciate your presence and for sharing with us your observations, your experience, and your insights. And we do really hope to be able to see you again, and hope you'll be able to join us again at our future events. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I would like to hand it back to our host, Adrian. Over to you.